Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Be the CEO of Your Life. I am here with Greg Kligman, who he's a manager and leader development. He's part of a management and leadership team at Amazon Web Services. And I wanted to tell you that he's a peer of mine. He is a coach, and we just finished a program together on executive and leadership coaching. So I heard him obviously personally talk, and I wanted him to come and talk to all of us because he developed the Language of Empathy workshop to help leaders communicate with empathy. And Greg, you can correct me later if I am totally wrong, but you know well emotional intelligence. You teach, you coach, you move in the realm of emotional intelligence, which is a bit of a buzzword right now. Everybody's like, I am emotionally intelligent. What does that even mean? So I think that that's part of like what I think you and I can kind of break down for the listeners here. Greg is currently pursuing his professional coaching designation with the International Coaching Federation, and he provides executive coaching to leaders at Amazon from director to vice president. Whoop, whoop. That's huge. And for the past 5 years, Greg has volunteered with the stress centers of the Greater Toronto Area, first as a crisis line responder, and now as a facilitator and trainer in their supervisor support program. And I'm going to leave it at that. You have obviously a phenomenal CV, Greg. It's impressive. I love that you actually, a lot of what's in here is volunteer work. So obviously your heart comes from, you have a good heart, but also you're very intelligent. I happen to know that. We're now just going to tap into that intelligence and a bit of what you do in your work. I don't know what we're going to title this episode yet, but it will likely be something along the lines of empathy in leadership or in communication. I don't know. We'll shape this. What do you think?
Yeah, we'll shape it. Well, thanks, Olga. It's great to be here with you. And I like you. So, it's just, I'm going to try not to have too much fun, just try to be a little bit professional for a change
We should
here.
have a lot of fun. I'm sure, just like for listeners, it has to be a fun episode.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we're
Yeah.
capable of doing that.
Yeah. Actually, at Amazon, so I talk a lot in terms of Amazon terms, and there is a leadership principle called strive to be Earth's best employer. And that calls out leading with empathy for one thing, but it also calls out having fun at work. It's important. It's important to just have some joy in one's day when one's doing the things they do. So why not? Let's have fun.
Why not? And look, they're killing it as a company. So, there might be something to say about having fun at work. And we are working. So thank you for your time. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me. So what do you want to talk about, Olga?
I have no idea. Why don't you introduce yourself? What didn't I say about you that might give us a context
So
of
I'll just correct one thing from the bio. It's not the supervisor support program; it's the survivor support program. So that's working with people who have suffered a traumatic loss. But one thing that's really cool that I'm really proud of is I've brought that grief support system into Amazon. So while in the community I work with people who have lost somebody to a suicide, at Amazon I've brought in the same program, but it's for the pregnancy and baby loss
you
group. So
did.
we put
Yes.
together a support group for people who have lost either a child or a pregnancy, whether directly or indirectly. And that's a population who doesn't really get much opportunity to be heard and support each other and have people understand them. So it's really great to do things that I know matter. You know, in any work life, in any life in general, there's times we ask ourselves, why am I doing this? Like, does this matter? Is this of any value? If I just stop doing this now, would anybody notice or care? But there are some things we get to do, as you know, and you do this with coaching. So I think you're one of the few lucky people who knows that everything you do is meaningful and you're changing lives. So I'm just trying to get to that point where to shift the balance, to really do more and more work that I know is meaningful and rewarding. So yeah, I'm just really lucky I get to do that. And Amazon gives lots of room to if you have what you think is a good idea, they encourage you to bring it forward. So I'm really lucky that way.
That's amazing. One, you're making me want to work for Amazon. And it's a great advertisement for recruiting people to work for Amazon. But all jokes aside, I think that's impressive. I remember talking to you about whether or not that was a good idea to bring that sort of grief into the context of Amazon, and what would that look like. And as a mom, as a lost mom, I think it's so incredible that you have brought that, because it is true. It's not a community that gets much support at all. And I call myself a lost mom because the lost moms have told me to call myself that, but I've lost pregnancies. So I think it's so powerful because we don't talk about it. And most people go back to work like nothing ever happened when the loss has been significant. So, wow, I know there's part of this audience who follows me because of their fertility struggles or loss struggles. And I know that this will be like really like an exciting thing for them to hear that you've done that. And that there's people like you, Greg, doing this. So there you go. It's finding purpose on what you said, on what you do. How much that, how much of that relates to leading with empathy, that purpose?
Yeah. So empathy, when it comes to supporting people who are bereaved, who are going through the grief journey, empathy is often the only tool I have, right? To listen and to let people know that their feelings make sense and they have a right to their feelings. There's nothing I can say that can take pain away. There's no option of fixing the issue. You know, as much as I might wish, gee, I wish I could take the pain away. Not an option. You can't do that. It doesn't work that way. So empathy is really fundamental to so many human interactions, whether it's leadership, whether it's friendship, whether it's supporting one another through super hard times or any times. It's fundamental, really. And maybe I can start, or we can start just by distinguishing two terms which are sometimes confused, which is sympathy and empathy, right? Because often when somebody suffers a loss, what is the first thing that we tends to roll off our tongue in support of somebody who's suffered a loss?
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. An expression of, I feel bad for what you're going through. Whereas the language of empathy, the workshop I created, was to help put empathy into language. Because an empathetic statement doesn't really roll off the tongue quite the same way. It's like, well, what does empathy sound like? I want to say I'm sorry. No, that's not empathy, that's sympathy. So sympathy conveys, I feel bad for what you're going through. Where empathy, an empathetic statement, is to say, I'm with you in some kind of way. I understand what you're going through. Or if I don't understand, I'm trying to understand. Or at least I'm with you in this feeling and I accept it and I want to hold space for it. Because often we can't understand what somebody's going through. Even if we ourselves have gone through something extremely similar, we're not going to have the same experience. So we can try to understand. And that's the difference between sympathy and empathy. It's feeling bad for you versus being with you in the moment. And how technical do you want me to get, Olga? Because I can go
No,
into
that's
three different.
technical. Oh, you know, I'm a geek, Greg.
You're a
We can
geek?
cover this.
Okay. So let's geek
Um,
out. You want to
but
geek
I
out on
wanted to
empathy?
say something here.
Yeah.
I love and I think they're both needed. Like, I think the feeling bad moves us to want to be with you, right? Like, I feel so, I can't imagine you having gone through whatever. Um, and it's motivating me to now accompany you as you go through that emotion.
Yeah, they
That's
often do go together. They often do, but they don't have to. You can actually have one and not the other. You can have sympathy without empathy. You could have empathy without sympathy, and you can certainly have both together.
and you can have none.
And you can have none. Probably not the kind of people you or I would like to hang out with, but yes,
Hopefully they're behind bars.
it is.
But
Hope they're somewhere
but
far away. Yeah.
but walk me through. So I love the title, the language of empathy, and that you asked what would empathy kind of do? What would that sound like? Um, and I wouldn't want anybody listening to this thinking like, oh, sympathy is bad, right? Like it serves a purpose as well.
Not
Although
bad.
the
Yeah.
feeling sorry is what we all are allergic to. Having somebody feel sorry for ourselves is not like, at least for me, I speak for myself, is not my favorite thing to have around me either.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, Could I offer a tangible example that I've had with that?
Sure.
Yes, I'm thinking back to a conversation I had on the crisis line,
Mhm.
and I remember a woman called, and she really unburdened and vented all sorts of terrible things that were happening. And before I could say anything, she said, "And don't you dare tell me you're sorry to hear this. I don't want to hear you say how sorry you are." And I said, "I wasn't about to say I'm sorry. I was just going to say, wow, it sounds like you've got a ton on your plate right now." And that's what she needed. It just drained the tension right out of the conversation. So
She
what she
felt
wanted was
heard.
empathy, not sympathy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's so powerful. I love that example.
But you're right. Sympathy isn't bad. Plenty of people are very happy, to are comforted if you say that you're sorry they're going through this. But it could have a little nuance. Like if I say I'm so sorry to hear that, it could put the other person now in the position of they now have to comfort me. Like, oh, thank you.
I feel
Right?
so bad.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I went through something very traumatic when I was maybe 18. And I noticed people would like even cry, tell me how sorry they were.
Mhm.
And I experienced exactly that, where I was like, I was better than they were. Like, I'm okay. Trust
Yeah.
me, you will be
Yeah.
okay too. You will be okay after you're done thinking about my experience, you know? And so I
Yeah.
think that's such a good even reframe. Even though very sensitive people want to feel or want to express how bad they feel about, the person they're talking to.
Yeah.
Um, maybe hold it together before they go in, like so that you can actually be available to that person you're going
Yeah.
to see. Love it.
Because you found yourself in the position of having to console those who are trying to console you, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like multiple times. I'm like, but you know what? In a way, I feel personally, maybe with my personality, that just pushed me to put it together. Like I will get through this. Don't worry about it. I want like they mirror maybe a part of myself that I thought like can do better. Anyways, coming back to this, how does this relate to leadership? How does empathy like so we're talking about grief because the volunteer work that you do and now you brought into Amazon, which I'm just gonna thank you for all the people, all the women who have experienced specifically pregnancy loss, and for all the parents who have lost a child. Like, thank you for having that
That,
initiative and
that's
and
very,
and
very
doing
kind
it.
of you to
Like,
say.
we're a community, so thank you. Um, moving into what you do for work, like bringing empathy into leadership. What the heck is that all about? I want to know.
Yeah. So what is the role of a leader? What does leadership do, right? Leaders
Mhm.
set a vision, and ultimately a good leader needs to motivate people, right? And beyond motivate them to bring out their best and encourage them to want to bring their best. And there's actually a lot of data that shows when it comes to empathy, it's not merely a nice to have. Some people do perceive, there's a lot of misperceptions about empathy, and I hope we talk about some of them because
Sure.
a lot of people believe that empathy is kind of a squishy thing and it's got to make things easier for people and lower our standards. It's not that at all. What it really is a way of acknowledging that the human beings that are on your team are in fact human beings, and we're gonna recognize them as such and treat them as such. And the data confirms that it is unequivocal that when people, especially Generation Z, when they are treated with empathy, they want to work longer hours, they want to give their best, they want to dedicate themselves completely to the task at hand. And the opposite is also true. They will leave the manager, the team, even the company if they perceive that there's going to be an empathetic environment elsewhere. So it really is a business imperative, not just a nice to have. And it fits into so many different leadership styles, some certainly more than others. So I want to refer to some of the leadership styles that the six that were brought forward by Daniel Goleman, and I have them right in front of me because I didn't want to forget them. So he's the visionary style. So built on inspiring and motivating people. So what does empathy have to do with that? If you can have some kind of connection to what people, their values are, you can inspire them a little more effectively, perhaps, than if you don't. Requires empathy to do that. Then there's the coaching style, which is all about working directly with people. Again, knowing their feelings and perspectives and values can help you do that. The affiliative style, which is connecting with other people Empathy is so tied to that. Democratic style. Those are the top 4 styles. Empathy is so clearly connected to them. Now, he also mentions too what he calls dissonant leadership styles, which is the pace setting, so which is all focused on results, and we got to do this by this time, or the commanding style, you do this now. So less room for empathy in those. And certainly sometimes in leadership, we don't have time for empathy. We might have to get the job done. But by and large, the resonant leadership styles thrive with empathy involved in them. That ability to connect with people on a human level and recognize that they have perspectives, that they have feelings, and that they matter. If we can connect with that, we can be much more effective leaders than if we don't. And if you don't have empathy, it won't even occur to you that people do have that inner life, that inner experience. All the stuff that we don't see when we look at someone, their values, their belief systems, their upbringing, their fears, their motivations, their priorities. It takes empathy to even realize that people have that inner story. And all of that can be accessed with conversation, which is what I talk about in the Language of Empathy course. But it comes with a great big however. The however being personal boundaries have to be respected. Not everybody necessarily wants to talk about their upbringing or any of a million things that make us unique. And by the same token, not everybody wants to hear of that, right? So, Olga, I could be super curious about your value system. Maybe you're not comfortable talking about it. By the same token, there could be a part of your upbringing or what the hidden part of what makes Olga who she is that you want to talk about that I might not be comfortable hearing about, right? So we're both always negotiating these personal boundaries, and it's always on a person-by-person basis, case by case, context matters, power dynamics matter. So there's no one-size-fits-all solution. There's no boxes we can tick in the domain of interpersonal communications. As you know, it's a lifelong learning process. But I think empathy is worth investing the time and energy to learn. And in the Language of Empathy workshop, I try to make it simple. I break it down into the LOVE acronym. So we communicate empathy with love, which stands for listening, observing, validating, and exploring. So listening is listening skills, which breaks down into one further acronym, which is SPACE. And I offer it so that you can imagine you're giving the speaker the space they need to fully express themselves. Which stands for silence, prompting, attention, confirming, and effort. So that's how SPACE breaks down. So we have listening, then we have observing. What information is available by what we see? A lot of information is available by what we see, but we have to be very careful because what we see could lead us to assumptions that go the wrong way. So we have to be very careful about the information that's observed, especially when it comes to emotions. You know, for example, somebody could be smiling because they're happy, but it's also possible to smile when you're not happy, right? Mm-hmm. We could be crying because we're sad. But a woman actually told me, and I didn't know this, and when she said it in the workshop, a lot of other women nodded their head. Women could cry when they're angry. That could be a sign of anger when women are crying.
Or in my case, when you're very grateful.
Yeah, or overwhelmed or grateful, right? So there are cues that we can pick up on, but we have to be careful of making snap judgments that what we see has a specific meaning. So that's observing. Validation is really what I would call the language of empathy, which was the biggest learning opportunity for me when I went through all the training that I did and the grief work that I did. It's really how to put empathy in words, how to tell somebody that you acknowledge their feelings and that they make sense to you, which is the difference between a sympathy statement and a validation statement. Like, you know, something like if you realize somebody is really struggling, just to say, yeah, I can hear that struggle. I get it. That's it. It can be as simple as that, but it tends to be a learned skill because it doesn't tend to roll off the tongue as easily as I'm sorry, right? And then the E in the LOVE acronym is for explore, which is really asking yourself, when I want to support somebody with empathy, what's the best way to do that? It can be very tempting to jump into problem-solving mode, right? Olga, we know this as coaches, right? We can kind of lock in on what we think somebody needs, and we got to kind of get out of our own way and keep our assumptions in check and really approach the topic neutrally and give the person the opportunity to talk. What do they need? And I didn't make this one up at all, but I heard something that's super helpful. It's to ask yourself, which H do they need? Which of the three H's? Do they need to be heard? Do they need to be helped? Or do they need to be hugged? What are they looking for? To be heard, to be helped, or to be hugged? Now at Amazon, I remind people we don't hug people in the workplace. But as a leader, it could be very important to notice if somebody needs healing, right? So we're not going to hug them per se, but we have resources. We have the EAP and other resources we can refer them to. So it's valuable as a leader to know what somebody actually needs from you, right? Before we can go into problem solving mode. And for a lot of leaders, we tend to want to default to fixing right away, but that could actually be an empathy blocker, the desire to fix right away.
Yeah,
this is a lot of me talking, Olga.
I love it. You're the guest.
I find your voice more interesting than my own. So
normally it's me talking by myself, Greg. So I love when somebody else comes and takes the space.
Okay.
First of all, one question I've got: do you have these acronyms in a handout that we can add to the show notes? Something
I don't actually, and somebody has a lot of people have asked me for a leave behind in the workshop, so I still have work to do in the workshop itself, because I'm going to create a series of reminder videos and so on. So even within the workshop itself, I'm still in the process of developing new material. So long answer, no, I don't have a handout, but we can certainly maybe spell it out and in a description, right? Just a reminder of what they all stand for. Yeah.
I loved the acronym LOVE, obviously, and how you described each of those elements. And I think you just brought up the point of the hardest part for a leader, and I would say for a caring human, is to not jump into problem solving or fixing.
Yeah.
So the moment we notice somebody has a strong emotion, our go-to automatic is, how do you not feel that? How do I get you out of, you even said it, when you are talking about grief, like you wish you could just remove that pain from people. That is the natural human thing to want to have for others. Yeah. And it requires self-containment and skill to realize, although that appears helpful, the receiver of let me fix your emotion might not feel heard or helped or hugged. Like might not even see it as helpful, right? Like
yeah, could feel simply invalidated, right? Which is the opposite of validation, right? And as we know, Olga, from our coach training, self-management is so important, right? Knowing what's going on inside. Maybe this is a good segue to talk about, where empathy sits in the emotional intelligence quadrants in general. So we have the self side and the other side. So the first is self-awareness when it comes to emotional intelligence. How well do I know what's going on within myself at any time? Do I know what I'm feeling? Am I in touch with what's happening inside? And from there comes self-management. Can I then manage what's going on? It's one thing to know I'm angry. It's an entirely different skill set entirely to then manage that anger, right? What do I do with it? Can I control that? And it's not just controlling anger. It comes down to motivation. It's managing myself, getting myself to do things, to not do things. And then we have the others side and social awareness. So which is analogous to self-awareness, social awareness, what's going on within other people. That's where empathy lives. That is really a super important part of emotional intelligence, because the next quadrant is relationship management. And that's where leadership tactics, like really motivating people and setting the agenda and working with people and leading people and teaching people and mentoring people. How can we really do that if we don't have the awareness, the social awareness part, the empathy? If we have no idea what people are going through, what they're feeling, how could we really effectively relate to them as people in a way that would be meaningful for them? Yeah.
Oh my God, my brain has gone in so many different directions. So I'm gonna self-manage.
Self-manage. And would it be helpful to just put on the table the three main kinds of empathy, and then we've got all the building blocks, and then we can build any Lego house we want, you and me together. Yeah. So the language of empathy focuses on, there's three kinds, but I focus on cognitive empathy. So the first kind of empathy is cognitive empathy. With cognitive empathy, it's a cognitive exercise that I'm going to mentally try to understand, or maybe I do understand, but I'm trying to understand your perspective. Your perspective will make sense to me on a cognitive level. I'll give you an example. Let's suppose that you are not an animal person, a pet person at all, don't particularly care for pets. But you hear a good friend of yours tells you that their beloved family dog just passed away and they're really, really sad and struggling. Now, you as a non-pet person wouldn't feel particularly sad about anything going on, and you wouldn't share their sadness, but you would understand it. It would make sense to you. That's cognitive empathy. I don't share your feeling, but I get it. It makes sense why you would be sad. The next kind of empathy, which is not, it's not that one's better, it's just a different kind, is emotional empathy. This is the domain of empaths, people who really pick up on the feelings of those around them, just happens like sponges. As with emotional empathy, you actually will feel the feeling somebody's feeling. So in the case of your friend telling you their dog died and they're sad, you might pick up on that sadness in your own body, even if you're not a pet person, because you're not sad about the dog. It's not about what happened. You're simply picking up on their feeling.
Yep. That's my expertise.
Yeah. So I am actually fortunate that I don't have a lot of emotional empathy, because if I did, it would be really hard to do the kind of grief support work I do, because I would just be absorbing all the pain that I'm present to, and it would be really, really exhausting and hard. So it's not that emotional empathy is better. On one hand, it's a beautiful gift to be that naturally in tune to fellow people, right? I think, Olga, you know that because you are somebody with a lot of emotional empathy. But as you know, it could be a burden, right? You are picking up on their feelings.
It's a gift and a curse all at once.
Right. Yeah. And then the other kind of empathy is a combination. So it's either cognitive and or emotional empathy, and you also have a burning desire to help. That's called compassionate empathy. Again, that could be a lovely thing, but it could also tend to make you want to jump into problem solving mode a little too quickly, because you're so eager to help. So again, it comes from a lovely place, but it's not always the most appropriate response. So as leaders, it's good if we're in touch with which kind of empathy we have most. And the good thing about this cognitive empathy is available to learn if you want it. Whereas emotional empathy, we kind of come into the world wired that way. Can't really learn to pick up on others' actual feelings like a sponge. But cognitive empathy, we can learn by listening, by observing, and also by the first piece of emotional intelligence, which is self-awareness. Actually, by paying attention, starting to get in touch with what we're going through, noticing feelings, noticing how complicated they can be, how sometimes we can have a feeling and we might lack the vocabulary for it. By just doing that cognitive work of looking inside ourselves, it could help us then appreciate and get better at noticing what other people are going through.
So, Greg, I'm curious for the self-management piece of a leader, specifically if they are empaths, if they are very emotionally understanding. Is that what you said?
So if you have a lot of emotional empathy and you just find you're picking up on people's feelings in your own body, yeah.
Right. So I am a sponge. So I'm going to speak on behalf of all the empaths who are there in leadership who would likely find it difficult to be in that situation, because it is hard to feel how your supervisor feels physically in your body, and yet be a leader and be like, but the work has to be done. So how do you, in your role currently, help leaders who might be feeling like, I just feel too much? So what I see happening is that they cut off. They don't want to know more about that person. They kind of want to do the opposite of getting to know what's going on, because they already feel so much. How do they self-manage still with, doing their role as a leader that might have deadlines and the work has to be this quality, yet feeling all the feelings that their teammate might have?
Yeah, so I have a few suggestions. It starts with self-compassion. Recognize and honor the fact that you have this extra let's call it a burden, right? It's a gift, but it's also a burden. It can be if you're just absorbing like a sponge the feelings of those around you. Recognize that you need some extra TLC from yourself, and then give yourself that extra self-care. Give yourself what you need. In my case, that might involve, this is a shameless poodle plug, that might involve sitting with a fuzzy dog on your lap when you're at work, just to
I
lower
was
your
gonna
stress
ask you
level.
how your puppy was doing. Still alive.
Getting,
You still have him. Good.
she's getting bigger. Yeah, she's now a massive 6 pounds rather than 2.
Oh,
Self-care is the answer to the question. You must prioritize, recognize the fact that you are taking on something that's difficult, that it's really beyond your control. You're picking up on feelings. Those feelings can be heavy, and you must prioritize doing something nice for yourself, building self-care, a mindfulness practice, perhaps. I'll often open this up to the group. Folks, what can we do? What are some good self-care ideas? Empaths in the room, sponges, what do you do? And it often comes down to being deliberate about carving out time for yourself and taking care of yourself and prioritizing your own needs. Some people find that a very shocking idea because they're so in tune to taking care of others, which is beautiful, but you must care for the caretaker. You must do that. Sometimes you have to pull the car off the road for a little tune-up. It's important because then the car will come back even faster and more efficient. So really, self-care is so, so important. Olga, let me put you on the spot. How are you with self-care?
I am really good
Good,
now,
good. What, yeah,
but
what works?
it took understanding. And so
Yeah.
that's and I would say really finding self-care for me was very important. I used to understand self-care as booking a massage or getting my hands done or something
Mm-hmm.
that was like, yes, taking care of my physical body, but it wasn't recharging.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely not like not nourishing the
Mm-hmm.
emotional part. Because when you're an empath, it's your emotional well-being that feels drained. And no amount of bubble baths or wine recharges your emotional well-being. So when I was able to pick up on that, I was able to find then what does recharge me specifically emotionally, my emotional body. And so for me, exercise is one of those must
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
And it just takes care of my emotions. I don't know how. I still don't understand how that works, that connection, but maybe it's an outlet for me. Maybe it's feeling good hormones that come back and like shift something internally. Meditation as well.
Yeah.
It's and silence, space by myself. Could be reading a book, bringing my brain to happy places. So with
Mm-hmm.
books or music, or family or people I love, that brings like regenerate, like just I just see that tank going back up,
Mm-hmm.
where I'm ready to give again. I'm like, okay, I'm good. But the simple understanding that I am a sponge did a lot for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm in sponge mode right now, and I get to just like kind of like squeeze that sponge out of all the liquid it just collected and understand it's not mine. That was
Mm-hmm.
that's I think that's very tricky for empaths because we feel it so in our body that is sometimes very hard to recognize that it's not, there's nothing wrong with you right now, and you're like that came from a meeting you went
Yeah.
to, or in my case walking into a hospital. I can tell you like suddenly I feel overwhelmed by all the emotions I feel.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
so creating that space after, even when I do give talks that are very emotional, I will have the afternoon by myself
Yeah. Yeah.
to soothe
Yeah.
my nervous system.
Yeah. So I hope all the fellow empaths and sponges of the world are listening to what you're saying, Olga, because it's so important. What you're
Mhm.
saying is so important, that self-care piece.
And I
Yeah.
don't think of it as protection. I actually bothers me when people say I gotta protect my energy. It really bothers me because you're not, the word protection in my world implies that you are a victim to like this perpetrator other emotions or things that are happening. And so from that perspective, you forget about your inner power
Mm.
to shift things internally for yourself. So I initially, that's what I heard, like, oh, you're an empath, you gotta protect yourself. And then I was like, does that mean not leave my house ever again? Like, just people have emotions everywhere I go.
Yeah.
And so that's a very important shift for me to recognize I need no protection. I am protected already, being who I am. but noticing I just need to do this thing to compensate. It's almost like a risk mitigator. I feel, therefore I need to compensate for those feelings.
So you've gone from protection to compensation, is that right?
Sure.
Yeah.
I need no protection. Like I just need to tap into love and whatever that looks like. I guess empathy, right? Like empathy for myself
And also
versus making.
recharging, right? Recharging, right? Like just,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Cool. The other question I had when you were explaining understanding empathy, I'm thinking of leaders, or I work with I work with a lot of women who are in high leadership positions, or in positions they're not leading teams necessarily, but they are working in a project with a lot of people, and they don't always have the time nor the training to think about, like, so what are they going on with, why are they not doing this part of their project, and they do tend to forget that they're surrounded by humans, and like it's like that line is not met, what is wrong with you, why are you making me look bad. A lot of like high achievers will like get to their point and they don't care what path they have to get there, and sometimes other humans might appear as obstacles to get to where they want to. How do we invite them then to look at their teammates as humans, to like come back to like, okay, what else could be going on other than they're trying to slow me down, which might not be at all what's going on, right? How do we help them, if they're listening to this, utilize this information of empathy to better relate, to better become more cohesive in their teams and move alongside as we would want a leader to kind of be leading
It's
their
a
own
good,
positions, whatever position they have, essentially.
so it's a good question. And I also want to say that, even though the business, the data confirms that empathy is super important in the workplace, the reality is that it's a it's a fairly new idea of bringing it into work, right? Like if I think of my dad's generation, the managers never, the idea of empathy was not a thing, right? It was just, here's what you got to do
Mm-hmm.
and do it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And the reward
And
is for whoever did it exactly as I said it. Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah. And we see that kind of leadership certainly leads to positions of power, in politics, in many, there's certainly leaders who are known for their empathy and caring about other people, but there are certainly leaders who are not, right? And both of them, both of those styles do in fact ascend to power. Uh, what the data is suggesting is that work is changing, especially with the younger generations, that there's more of an expectation that we bring that humanity into work. And to get to your question, which I think is, a leader who's maybe been doing it one way and wants to start seeing if there's more room for empathy, I guess the first question for that leader is, am I effective as a leader? Because I don't think you 100%, you can be a kind leader, even if you're not an empathetic one, right?
Right.
So the first question is to do with some real soul searching. Can my leadership be more effective? Have I noticed that I see a limited connection with my team or among the team? There's a lack of safety that might be hindering innovation. Is there a real benefit? Am I convinced that empathy would be helpful in this situation? And if so, there are tons of resources. There's books, there's workshops. I mean, it's really there for the asking. I'm biased towards the language of empathy because I created it, but let's face it, there's a lot of awesome resources around where people could learn the tools and skills of empathetic leadership, right? That was a really long-winded answer, which I'm not proud of, Olga. Did I touch
Okay.
on some of your question at least there?
Yeah. Like, and I think, okay, so let's move into like, so there is a leaders, and we know we want to be effective leaders. We know that our efficiency as leaders is proven by how cohesive the work is getting done, how happy our employees are, um, how much progress as a whole we're making. Bring that down to teammates who need Greg to submit this at this time for me to be able to do this. Like, what is the space there of leading, because I one of the things I always want all the people to know is that you're leading always. You're a leader, whether that's your actual position management that says you're a leader, or you're leading in your household, or you're leading your own life. Like, you're just always leading. So I want to bring that sense of leadership and empathy in that leadership in their own positions for people who are not in management, who might be still working as a team. What kind of wisdom do you have for them when they themselves have had zero training on leadership, have read no books on leadership, and they're not seeing themselves as leaders, yet they're bothered by their relationships with other humans in their team?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question. And let me try to answer it as best I can in terms of an idea of what's called psychological safety, which is very important for teams who work together and who want to be innovative. So, what is psychological safety? Psychological safety is the belief that you will not be punished or humiliated, or there will not be retribution if you do the wrong thing or make a mistake. So if we look at that in terms of a leader who has a team and they want to inspire innovation, what does innovation often come with? It comes with risking doing things wrong, making mistakes. And there's actually a statistic that shows, and I bring this up in the workshop, that people when it comes to innovation, employees reported at 61% they are able to be innovative in an empathetic situation, organization, versus 13% when there's no empathy. Why? It's because a leader who has empathy can understand what it's like to be someone who is afraid of making a mistake and might be afraid of being judged if they do so. And that leader will be inclined to want to create an atmosphere where that retribution does not happen, where people feel they do have the safety to make a mistake. Conversely, if that leader does not have empathy, it'll never occur to them that the team might be scared of trying a new idea because it might come, and often comes, most innovation often comes with failure. Have I answered the question, or did I take it in a different direction?
You took it in a different direction, but I really like it.
Yeah, but if I'm going to be a coach one day, Olga, I got to actually listen to what somebody's saying and answer their actual question. So can we go back to your question?
I'm going to grab psychological safety, because I think each team member has that responsibility. Yeah. How am I contributing towards that psychological safety of the team so that people can be delayed and like self-aware and recognize, okay, my way of working is not working for the team. I think if I could follow your brain, I think that's what happened. That when I ask you how do non-leaders will utilize like this sort of empathy when they feel bothered, just to use a word, by the quality of the work, the pace of the work of their teammates, and might not have leadership. Like that's not my job. My job is not to make sure that you're doing well in your job, right? Like that's my manager's job, but to show up to that position. And then you went into psychological safety, which I appreciate, because I think it's who creates the environment of a team is all of us.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the questions I ask in the workshop is, when we talk about empathy, who should be empathetic to whom? Because there could be a belief that we're talking about leaders need to be empathetic for their direct reports. And yes, sure. But also the direct reports need to be empathetic for their leaders, right? Leadership could be a lonely place.
Oh my God, yes.
Let's be empathetic towards our leaders as well, and also to each other. It goes laterally as well. So really, ideally, everybody approaches everybody with empathy. And I actually role play this in a fun way in the workshop, where we bring in a topic. So it's a manager has set a deadline, and the employee is saying, I don't think I'm going to meet the deadline and I'm very stressed out. So they have this conversation, they role play it. And I say, first role play it with no empathy. Let's see how that sounds. And now we're going to role play it again with empathy, with the tools we've talked about in the workshop. So before you even have the conversation again, go through a little cognitive empathy exercise for each other. What are this person's stressors in life? What are their priorities? What's weighing on them? What are their values? What do they need? So the leader thinking that way about their report, but also the direct report thinking of that way toward their leader. And now say, have the conversation again. And by the way, even though you're having this conversation with empathy this time, you still can't move the deadline, because empathy is not about changing how rigorous the job is.
Or
That's not what
enabling.
empathy
Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
about.
Love
It's
it.
about
Okay.
changing how we relate to each other. And then they have the conversation again, and it is a starkly different conversation when they listen to each other, when they acknowledge that each person has their own inner experience and perspective that's important to them. It changes everything.
Wow. I just came out of a coaching call with a client of mine who, and I would say that I'm going to generalize to the majority of my clients, will have the complete opposite experience where they go into conversations thinking of what does Greg need? What will Greg think? What will Greg, and defaulting to your what will be best for you very empathetically, but having zero self empathy for their own needs, what they're feeling. And so that ends up going to the back burner, which in coaching we get to discover that long term that hurts everybody, right? Like that's not helping you. So I love this role play that you do, that I might do with my clients too, because if you have the conversation, not changing the deadline, we still have to be able to do whatever it is, but I'm not just gonna keep into consideration what I think you're feeling, but also bring up my feelings, because it could work both ways, right? Like anybody at work could never think about their needs, because they're so in my clients would call this people pleasing. I would probably say they care. They're so into the shoes of the other person.
And you reminded me of an interesting topic that has come up in the workshop, because one of the very first slides I share it's a picture of on the airplane when the mask comes down.
Right.
And I say, what? And I say, why am I sharing this slide, folks? And they all say, of course, it's because if we don't honor ourselves and care for ourselves, how are we going to be helpful to others? So 99% of the people were on board with that. But then a senior leader, she rose her hand and said, Greg, I don't really believe that, because as a leader, I feel it's my job to compartmentalize what I'm going through. It's not about what I need. I can rise to the occasion for the team and take care of them. What I need doesn't matter. And I thought, okay, well, I'm not going to tell her she's wrong, but I do bring it up in subsequent workshops. What do you think, folks? What do you think of that perspective? And the general answer that comes back is you can do that for a time, but ultimately it's going to catch up to you, right? If you don't honor what you need as a person, ultimately you won't be the most effective you can for your team, even though it might come from good intentions, to step up from the team. We must honor and care for ourselves as a strong foundation to be of good for others.
Yeah, I would imagine that's where burnout is born.
Yeah.
It's not sustainable. It's
Not sustainable, exactly. Not sustainable.
So much to think about from word empathy. I remember when you told me, like, I would love to come to the podcast. We'll talk about emotional intelligence. I'm like, how? Like, help me think about this. Like, how will this be a subject that we bring to the podcast?
I don't know. Has it been okay, or do we got to start over?
Yeah, no, I'm so glad. I'm
Have we
so
blown
glad.
it?
We're never gonna release this episode.
Yeah.
No, it's very interesting. And I think more and more work establishments are caring to like help people self-develop and think differently and think of purpose in what they do in their work. And I personally believe lack of purpose creates depression for humans. If you are doing things without knowing why or how, or like not connected to a purpose, it's very easy to lose interest.
Yeah.
And if you lose interest for a long time on the activities that you do every day, can't imagine you're happy. I can't imagine you're like hopeful for the future and excited. And I feel this type of conversations bring it back home. Like, yeah, how am I making this purposeful to me? How am I bringing empathy into what I'm doing? How am I sort of like caring at a bit greater level within what I do?
Yeah. Purpose. Actually, could I just share one more story? Because it happened in a
I could tell your
conversation.
brain was thinking I was going to tell you. What do you
Yeah,
think?
yeah. I'm
No,
not, it's terrible coaching practice what I'm doing. I should be listening to you, but you can see I've already, wheels are turning.
we're not coaching. You're
We're not
free.
coaching now. Yeah. So yesterday I had a conversation. Um, this is actually a fellow who I'm mentoring. Part of what we do is at Amazon is a lot of people mentor each other, developing
Yeah.
one of the leadership principles, hire and develop the best. So we're expected to help each other grow in different areas. So I'm mentoring a fellow in emotional intelligence, and he was a Marine. And he tells me that he just, this whole conversation about empathy doesn't really make sense to him because where he came from, you were given an order and you knew that that order had to be followed. And you knew that you would do anything for your teammates, that you're all on the same team. And he doesn't get the whole, well, I got to pause and figure out what your perspective is. And we were talking about that. And I said, do you think it's because possibly being in the military itself, you're so committed to the mission and the purpose that it's not about anything your leader's going to tell you. The purpose of being in the Marines itself, you know why you're there. So you don't need your leader to sell you that in any way. You're there for your country, right? Versus in corporate America, we're not there necessarily for, we have other choices, let's just say, right? We could be at one company, but we could also be at another, right? That's why perhaps empathy becomes much more important in the world of work. But I was scratching my head. It's because, yeah, you don't need empathy in the military, and it works very, very well. And he didn't feel disrespected by his leader. He liked getting direct orders. And the best I was able to maybe, let's say, challenge the idea is I said, imagine a time like, we see it now, people are going to war. Would it be helpful for the leader to realize or to understand that the people, the soldiers could, likely are scared of what's in front of them? And is it helpful for a leader to know that? And would it change the conversation? And he said, it would be helpful to know, but it's probably not going to change the conversation very much because they got to do what they got to do. And it might show weakness to take the conversation in any other way. So yeah, it was, it's a conversation that's left me thinking because I can't universally say, yeah, empathy is always awesome, is always
I would
appropriate.
say it is always awesome, but I would also remind you the training that military people have to go through. It's a bit of a brainwash to be able to follow orders and not have that own initiative. Like they might have the greater purpose of serving the country, and that moves them to want to follow all the orders. But part of their training is to disengage from their own leadership. They're just there to follow orders, and even the top of the top are following orders, and that's how that system works. And it has to be that way because if
Yeah,
we're all like, "And what do you feel?" and move with your feelings, nobody will be
yeah,
following. Like you wouldn't have an army, right? So like
yeah,
that's so specific to the army. And to your point, in my opinion, we're trying to move organizations to be the complete opposite of an army,
yeah, yeah,
like
yeah,
leadership, right? Like you just follow orders. We don't. It's this is an interesting conversation, and yet I need you to have no emotions so that you can go through. And like there's no time to have all your emotions. We can't do that because it will be weakness in
yeah,
their, like, and then so I think the context of this particular person is so, it's like to detach from that and like to discover what it's like to be, I get to now make decisions again, like connect to that part of their brain that has been shut off so that you can follow orders. Like part of
yeah,
their training is psychological, and they place them in a situation where they give up on themselves just having their own ideas. I studied human rights for a while, and that was
yeah,
part of the thing that we
yeah,
were studying is like what soldiers have to go through, what kind of training they have to go through to be able to not question orders.
yeah. Because it makes sense, right? It can be life and death decisions, and it's got to be done fast, right?
Yeah,
So it's got to be
yeah.
quick. Yeah. And I suppose the military is, if like it is that commanding leadership style. If I refer back to that list earlier, right?
Exactly.
This is what you got to do and do it. So it's not an empathetic approach. But then again, sometimes even in the world of work, that can be appropriate for a time, right? Sometimes we just got to step up. I've heard everything you've all said, but this is what we're going to do.
Right. And you're thinking it for the team, right? Like long term, like as a parent.
Yeah.
I don't tell my 4-year-old, how do you feel about taking a bath today? I tell him, you're taking a bath today. And he's going to tell me, I don't want to. And I'm going to have a lot of validation and compassion for my child who doesn't want a bath. But ultimately, I decide, and this is in your best interest. And you're going to smell great after, right? Like, so we're doing it. I'm not asking you. I often find myself telling myself, I'm not asking you if you want to take a bath. I'm telling you.
This isn't a negotiation. I don't know why you think it is. This is, you're getting in the bath. It's
what makes you think that? No, I'm still the boss.
Still the boss.
And that's appropriate to have. Like kids, like humans need those boundaries, those firm boundaries at time. But that doesn't mean I don't do it with kindness. That we cannot show up to that with a lot of love.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I don't know where to take this next.
I don't know. How long is the podcast? 4 hours? Like how long are we?
It's 1 hour. We're at the hour.
Oh, we're done. We're done.
Feels great. Awesome. Greg, from the bottom of my heart, thank you.
No, this is such a pleasure, Olga. Thank you for this. I'm so happy I got to meet you in this coaching program, and we get to do stuff like this. I hope we can collaborate more, and I hope everybody watching has gotten some value. And if you are a sponge, if you're an empath like Olga, one thing I want you to take away: do prioritize self-care. You deserve it. It's important.
I agree. I echo that. Greg, I'm also so grateful I got to meet you, and you might be the first man being interviewed in this podcast. Let's have more of you and other people that you know that might want to come. That's amazing. Thank you for your time. And I would love to see where you take this whole workshop to. I can see this being big for you and others. So I'm cheerleading you here.
I will keep you posted with pleasure. Thank you so much, Olga.
See you next Monday, everybody.